Well, ladies and gents, thank you for being here this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I would love to introduce you now to one of our sponsors and fantastic speakers, Kyle Howard from Omilia. He's an enterprise solutions architect with the team from Omilia. You can find their booth out in the area outside in the expo hall. But will you please give a warm welcome to our next speaker for Beyond Bots, Real CX Wins with Agentic AI, Kyle Howard from Omilia. Let's give it up for Kyle.
Hey everybody, thanks for allowing me to be here. So today we're going to talk really quick about a few things, right? So first of all, I'm going to start with what is Agentic AI. The second piece that I want to hit on is closed loop intelligence and why that's super important when we talk about how we transform customer experiences. And the third piece is really how does that all play into agentic AI adoption? So what is agentic AI, right? As an industry, we've done a really good job of confusing everyone and telling them what they should be paying attention to. I think one of the things that I see is that everyone seems to have an opinion as to what constitutes agentic AI. And at its most basic level, it's an intelligent system that can reason, plan, act autonomously, and learn from every interaction to achieve a specific goal, right? So that means that we're shifting away from what would be the traditional intent-based models and into more of a goal-oriented execution plan. When we start to look at what are the differences between, especially in conversational AI, between agentic AI and the traditional approach of deterministic chatbots to traditional AI, from an action and execution perspective, traditional AI is incredibly reactive. It's going to react to something that's said or typed or spoken, and it's going to execute down that path. From a complexity perspective, traditional AI is going to be based off of simple preset FAQs. There's no ability to dynamically learn. It's going to be limited to the current interaction from a contextual perspective, so it has no real understanding of what's happened historically. And the goal is specifically to provide information. Now, when we start to get into more agentic experiences, that's where we start to talk about proactive and autonomous capabilities, where we're initiating action, where we're allowing the system to plan its execution strategy and then execute based off of the dynamic needs of a consumer. The complexity becomes those deeper, more intricate, complex, multi-step goals, similar to what you would have if you were talking to a human. Contextually, you have deep context, right? So we're using history, we're using sentiment analysis, we're using real-time data to understand how to make a plan and execute for that specific customer's needs event. And ultimately, the goal is to provide full resolution of the issue from end to end, including any semblance of fulfillment that needs to take place on the backside. So a lot of times what we see with customer experience leaders, we hear a lot of things, and I hear a lot of things, right? Like, we waste time verifying callers with PINs and security questions. Isn't there a faster, more secure way? What that really means is that there's friction in the authentication process, which is a pretty common experience. We hear a lot of times where there's a customer that's going to press 0 to immediately exit out of any semblance of automation. And what that equates to for me is really, that's low containment, because generic models frustrate customers. There's no flexibility, there's no context. We hear people say our last ASR couldn't handle accents or noise. How accurate is it really? And again, that's accuracy pain points, right? We only QA 3% of our calls. We don't know if agents show empathy or stay compliant. Can we detect that? Blind spots within the process. That limited level of insight really leads to a poor customer experience, and then it also negates the ability for the system to learn from the most valuable asset, which is a human that solves the problem, right? We tried AI, but it failed when it got messy, and that's where we start to see things like brittle AI and the inability to solve complex problems. There's no fallback logic. There's no ability to learn from what's taken place before. And then it's too hard to update or scale, right? Every tweak, needs an IT or an engineer or a voice engineer. And what that equates to really is a challenge around time to value. Because at the end of the day, when something needs to change or when a new service needs to be introduced, these things need to happen very quickly. So what makes agentic AI CX solutions successful? It's 4 key pieces, right? So it's precision, right? We need to be incredibly accurate with both industry and company-specific models. So that's high accuracy LLMs. It's another thing that doesn't get talked about, honestly, enough in the industry, which would be SLMs or small language models. So what does that look like? Well, that just means that you're going to take something that requires like an alphanumeric value or a first name, and you're going to treat it differently than you would a sentence, right? Because those are different pieces of information. And they need to power reliable, low latency self-service. So that precision piece becomes vitally important. Adaptability, the ease of training, deployment, and being able to iterate and constantly grow. That's how we can provide improvement at scale. We need observability, and observability is probably one of the least talked about and most important pieces when it comes to how to transform CX, especially in an agentic world, right? We need clear data, clear insights, the ability to understand why the system is making the decision and the plan that it's making so that we can improve. And then we need trust, right? That's enterprise-grade security, that's compliance enablement, safe automation, and the ability to understand and classify data that's being used so that it's treated appropriately. So what does that lead to, right? So that's really not an agentic solution. What we see and what enables our customers to really start to transform their experience is more of an agentic AI adoption framework, right? Because we can see up at the top left that when we increase the level of autonomy without any semblance of phased adoption, and we just pull the trigger, it's very low control and it's very high risk. And that leads to situations like we've all heard of, like Air Canada and some other scenarios where there have been really some significant publicity and business level challenges. But when we start to take that phased approach of adopting at our own pace, we can increase the level of autonomy while also decreasing risk by providing a framework that allows consumers to ease in and CX leaders to ease into agentic adoption. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like an architecture that's going to create a pathway to safely evolve from rule-based bots, like we talked about, to fully autonomous agentic systems. Now, that doesn't mean that any rules-based bot is a bad idea. Those deterministic chatbots, deterministic voice bots, absolutely 100% serve a purpose in today's customer experience world. Like, if I'm going to make a payment, there's no reason for me to provide an agentic experience to make a payment. It's a very cut and dry process, and the goal is to execute a task. So if we start with this reactive AI planning and reactive rigid execution for a deterministic bot, what comes next is something that's more semi-autonomous. And frankly, this is where I see a lot of our enterprise customers today. And what this looks like is they want the ability to have adaptive planning. They need the ability to allow the system and allow the bot to understand what the needs event is, create a plan for execution, but keep that execution plan inside of a rigid path similar to a deterministic chatbot. So this is really the best of both worlds where a lot of people start. Now, as we continue along, we start to get into adaptive suggestions when we inevitably escalate out of self-service, right? And that's where we start to get into a more dynamic agent assist experience. And why this becomes super important is because now we're allowing the system to leverage and understand what a human is doing to handle something that escalated out of that rigid execution plan. So there was obviously a deficiency in what the system could execute. We escalated to a human. We're providing agent assist suggestions, but we're also understanding how the human solved the problem so that we can make the system better, which ultimately leads us to a fully autonomous agent, where now all of a sudden we have the ability through data, insights, observability to go through and adaptively plan how to solve the problem, and we can autonomously execute any of those multi-layer goals along the way. So this ultimately leads to that scalable, resilient platform that learns from every interaction and takes advantage of probably the most valuable asset in any organization, which is going to be the human level experience, to be able to grow, understand, and perform better. And so for us at Omilia, that's really where we start to get into what does unified AI look like. And for us, it's that continuous loop of improvement where we start with learning, right? We're going to capture intelligence from every AI, every live agent interaction, and we're going to understand what's being talked about and what's happening. From there, we can go into discovery, where we start to allow agentic tools to convert dialogues, standard operating procedures, unstructured data, structured data, and build that into suggestions for applications, right? And then from there, we can use those tools to go and create an experience. So we're using the intelligence that we've learned and we've discovered now to build an actual experience that's guided by a framework that allows us to go through and understand how to plan for situations that are going to come up and what the execution strategy needs to look like. And then from there, we can build out those actual interactions so that we can learn from each one, make it better, and make that request better in real time as the system goes along, continuously learning from each other to make things better. So what does this look like in practical application? We have a major US financial services credit card brand. They process 96 million calls a year. They've invested millions and millions of dollars in their internal AI. They hit a glass ceiling after 15 years of relentless fine-tuning, and they could not get above 64% containment. We came in and we delivered an initial 5% containment increase. How did we do that? Very basic stuff. We use small language models and large language models to go in and decrease the word error rate from about 6% to 3%. So accuracy in transcription allowed us to immediately realize some things that weren't being contained and provide a 5% containment increase. With additional tuning, we delivered an additional 4% of autonomous containment, increasing their containment to 73%. At 96 million calls, that 9% increase was a significant savings for the brand. When we start to look at some of the other breakthrough voice AI case studies, Taco Bell, so quick serve restaurants, doesn't seem like it would be something that to be talking about at an AI conference, right? But what we found was that with Taco Bell, one of the things that was really unique is that they managed to have 90% successful order containment across their top performing sites. So 90% accuracy on ordering in a drive-through that's powered solely by AI, with all of the sounds, all of the other pieces of information and challenges. There were a couple of things that were really interesting outcomes as a result of this deployment. The first one was that the overall bag size increased by about 10% on the stores that were adopting AI. Purely because the system had a friendly voice that was offering upsell opportunities based off of data, and people said yes. The other thing that was really interesting was there was a significant decrease in employee turnover. Turns out nobody likes to work the drive-through window. But that does one thing, right? Like that allows all of a sudden you to learn from the best employees and the best experiences. And it solves one of the biggest challenges that we see today in AI, which is fear, right? So in this case, it had nothing but a positive increase in the employee experience. The other thing that we saw was it was rapid scaling of a SaaS implementation. So there was no store-specific manual work, no specific hardware that had to be deployed. This was something that fit into Taco Bell's deployment model. So they started off with 650 locations across the US and Canada. They're deploying another 1,000 stores as we speak. So these are the scenarios that we see that really start to try to, change the game. And we see the same thing with utility companies. We see the same thing with other financial services companies. What we start to see is that there's challenges that are, whether it's inefficient personalization, whether it's, legacy IVRs that lack certain capabilities. When we start to get in and use data, especially actionable data, to build experiences and enable a agentic planning phase, even if we limit the execution to that rigid execution path, we start to see real transformation across the customer experience. And it allows us to go through and, again, leverage the information and the know-how and that vital resource of the humans that are solving those interactions that couldn't be solved through automation to make the system better. Thank you so much for your time.